The 107 Hoover Gangster Crips and the 10 Deuce Budlong Gangster Crips are mortal enemies. And it's been that way for more than 4 years, with the two gangs often having violent run-ins with each other. And the end results coming with beatdowns, being robbed, and often murder. What is exactly what played out when a member of the 107 Hoovers was murdered on April 2nd of 2012. Later that same evening, Beasley and Wright, members of the 10 Deuce Budlong Gangster Crips, were standing on 102nd Street near Normandy when a white Acura pulls up and blocks their driveway. An eyewitness stepping out of her car across the street heard one shout, "Hoover!" followed by the sound of popping noises, and she ran for cover. Meanwhile, 10 Deuce Budlong Gangster Crip members, Beasley and White, was banged on or confronted by a man in an Acura who claimed Hoover. But before they could respond, the member pulled out a pistol and immediately started firing multiple shots at the Budlong Gangster Crips before speeding away from the area. Wright, he was shot in his left leg, ankle, right thigh, left wrist, and back. And Beasley, he was shot in his right middle finger. A couple minutes later, Los Angeles County Sheriffs, they responded to the scene of the shooting. It was informed that a sedan was involved, but nearby officers couldn't spot a car of that description. But a few hours later, a detective spotted an Acura traveling at a high rate of speed. He attempted to pull the car over, but it didn't stop. Instead, it continued to speed through residential neighborhoods, running several lights and stop signs, while going at least 65 miles per hour. The cops, they chased that car for at least 30 minutes, and during the pursuit, 2 firearms were thrown out of the Acura. Eventually, the Acura crashed, followed by Deshaun Atkins, a member of the 107 Hoover Crips, and another gang member getting out of the car and running off. Also, a third firearm was tossed during a foot chase. Eventually, Atkins was caught. And while in jail, his hands was tested for gun residue and it tested positive. In addition, the detectives retrieved firearms thrown from the Acura. And eventually 19 cartridge casings and 1 expended bullet collected at the scene of the 102nd Street shooting were determined to have been fired from the recovered handguns. However, there were no fingerprints on the weapon, and the third firearm, it was never found. LA County Sheriff's Department Detective Derek White was assigned as the lead investigator in the Beasley White shootings. And he met with Wright on 3 occasions after the shooting. The first time was the following day, while Wright, he was in ICU. The second time, it was a month later, when Wright, he was preparing for his 4th surgery. On that occasion, he showed Wright a 6-pack photographic lineup containing Atkins' photograph. But Wright did not identify him as a shooter. The third interview was the next year, in 2013, and portions of that interview were recorded and played for the jury. Wright told the investigating officer that he believed the 107 Hoovers suspected the 10 Deuce Budlong Gangster Crips were involved in a murder earlier in the day on April 2nd of 2012, and the 107 Hoovers had shot in retaliation. Thankfully, Wright and Beasley survived the shooting, and during the trial, none of the men mentioned Atkins. But there were several witnesses present during the shooting, and while a couple of them couldn't recall their statements in court, the detectives, they were still able to get some to come forward. And due to that evidence, ballistic evidence, and a thorough investigation, a jury found Atkins guilty of the attempted murders of Wright and Beasley. Man, thankfully no one's life was taken in this situation. But as we cover the 107 Hoover Gangster Crips, you're gonna see that at the core of the 107s and the Rolling Hundreds, you'll find a deep hatred with one another that's rooted way back to the 1970s. And through that hatred, there's been numerous fights, robbings, setups, and more than a few deaths among the two umbrellas. That includes shootouts, drive-bys, and walk-down murders.
Like the big homies' little brothers and shit.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? People don't know that, but they was all connected like that. A lot of the big homies like Poopy and them, all them, they little brothers and shit. UG.
Okay.
So a lot of them was like I said, they was connected. They would have been Hoovers.
And a lot of other crazy situations. But to do that, we definitely have to address some things about the game we're talking about today. The 107 Hoover Criminal Gangster Crips. The Hoovers, they're known as one of the most hated and dangerous gangs in Los Angeles. And for absolutely great reason, too. This gang, they've never been one to play with, and their history speaks for itself. But when it comes to the 107s or the Celos, this section of the Hoovers is known as one of the most ruthless and scandalous of them all. So they definitely have a story to tell. Yeah. All right. Welcome to CALI'S Most Dangerous. Let's get into it.
When school get ready to start, all you hear is, did you hear about what the Hoovers did?
Mhm.
It's not about
Not 92nd,
not in 7th,
not 83rd, not yet. Hoover.
Yeah, you know, then that's why they were saying Hoover did it.
Hoover did. Yeah.
History of the 107 Hoover Gangster Crip.
This indictment lays out 3 identified murders, 7 attempted murders, multiple gun seizures, and the trafficking of methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine.
The original Hoovers, they formed around 92nd Street and Hoover Avenue at around 1969 or 70. Initially, they were just a collective of kids from various neighborhoods that socialized on 92nd Street when the Crips were in their infancy stages. As the West Side Crips formed in an area around St. Andrews Park, they functioned with the Hoovers, and eventually the Hoovers came under the Crip umbrella as the Crips philosophy spread throughout Los Angeles. When specific neighborhood identities began, the Hoovers, with the help of Hoover Joe, who was widely known as the founder of Hoover, became the 9 Deuce Hoover Crips in the same neighborhood around 1973. Originally, most Hoovers claimed the widely known 9 Deuce Hoovers, but eventually, several other Hoover Crips started to form, from 43rd Street in South Los Angeles to 112th Street. There's other factors on why this separation occurred, but it was mostly due to how widely spread the Hoovers started to get.
Hoover had love. And I remember when we would be way in the hundreds and it'd be 30 of us walking all the way to motherfucker to a party on 74. You know, that's just how it was. Wishing a motherfucker tried to do something, throwing rocks at cars, giving it up. You know, it was a lot of love back then, man. And the same vice versa, the polls and you know, everything, they have come up that way.
In the 107 Hoover's case, being the 5th Hoover established, they originated in the 1970s, around 107th Street and Hoover Street, between Vermont and Figueroa. This area has been, and is today, known as one of the most dangerous areas in Los Angeles. This is mainly due to the gangs that surround that area. When looking at a gang map, you have this section of the Hoovers that starts on Century and spreads all the way up to 109th past Vermont Street. But the surrounding areas, aside from Hoover and Figueroa, have for the most part always been enemy gangs. For example, to the left of the 107s, you have the Denver Lane Gangster Bloods. To the right, you have the Rolling Hundreds, particularly the Underground Block Crips, the 107 Original Block Crips, and the Bloodlone Gangster Crips. All of these gangs have a long history of engaging in deadly wars with all sections of the Hoovers, especially the Rolling Hundreds. All this, it stems from the 1970s, when a lot of known gangs today were in their infancy stages. The Undergrounds, though, they were well established at that point and was known as the prominent gang. But the 107 Hoovers' new presence presented an issue for the UGs. This is because the Hoovers quickly became known as a gang widely known in that area, and in some cases, overtaking the notoriety that the UGs established. But all this tension came to a breaking point, particularly on July 4th of 1979, when a 107 Hoover Crip member, Andre Jones, who was also known as Lil Annie, was shot and killed by an underground Crip.
Us growing up like in UG hood and West Side hood and stuff like that, from my point of view, I just don't think that they really enjoyed us being Hoovers. They felt that that was they shit and they didn't want nothing new coming. Like I said before, they was like the shit then.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But then with 92nd, it was like a new flavor. Came through.
The juggernaut.
Yeah. And they didn't.
It landed. Yeah.
I don't think, you know, that's like anybody, bro. That's like, you know, anybody that's
trying to
that was so
overthrow.
dominant so long, you know, and then shit started getting turned over, you know, people don't like change.
That's right.
Because a lot of our G's, brothers was UGs and stuff, you know. And they didn't, I don't think they enjoyed the change because it was certain incidents happened after that, but.
This killing, it actually marks the first Crip homicide between gangs in Los Angeles, with it predating the murder of Tyrone Henderman from the rolling 60s by at least 2 months. And this killing, it still leaves a bad taste in a lot of the Hoover OG's mouth because of how close it hit to home. That's because Annie, he was a younger brother of OG Erskine Jones, an original West Side Crip, and Frank Jones, also known as Momo, from the 107 Hoover Crips, who was a well-respected big figure when it comes to the formation of this section of the Hoovers. In addition, there was a few other interactions that only added fuel to the war between the two gangs, with another death of a 107 Hoover planned out.
And we had a lot of anger when Dwayne Bodine got killed. When Dwayne got killed, everybody had anger. So I think when we first I remember we worked out, like, I'm not gonna lie. We do push-ups, fighting each other. We couldn't wait till the first day of school to watch them see them dudes. They killed all the homeboy, Bodine little brother.
That's why this war is considered one of the most, if not the most active war in LA today. With deadly stories often coming from both gangs over the years. Matter of fact, an insane situation played out in 2009 that only added fuel to the fire when it comes to the war between the 107 Hoovers and the Rolling Hundreds. On February 28th of 2009, non-gang member Gregory Davis and Rolling 100 members Dante Nolan had been invited to a house party by his nephew. With the two, they didn't stay as long as the attendees who were in their 20s, much younger than Davis and Nolan. So at around 1, Nolan and Davis was leaving the party, which was located on 107th Street near Normandy Avenue, right between the territories of the Rolling Hundreds and the Hoovers. The area just west of Normandy Avenue was a territory claimed by the underground Crips. The area east of Normandy Avenue was claimed by the Hoover. And as we know at this point, these two gangs have been engaged in a daily war with each other for over 4 decades. And this day, it was no different. As Davis was in the street, about to get in his car on the driver's side, and Nolan was standing on the sidewalk, waiting to get in on the passenger side door, Davis saw a black kid across the street from about 30 to 40 feet away. The kid, Domingo Hall, was a known member of the 107 Hoover Crips. And without any words, he pulled out a pistol and started firing multiple shots at the two men. Davis was shot 3 times in the abdomen before he and Nolan turned around and ran back towards the direction of the party. And while running, Davis took cover under a truck parked in the driveway of the house while Nolan tried to climb the fence. And as Davis ran, he was struck by 5 more bullets in his back, wrist, and his thumb. As he hit under the truck with 1 foot protruding, Hall approached and shot Davis in his foot. Meanwhile, Nolan, he was struck by 3 bullets. One of the bullets passed through his liver and heart, killing him within minutes. Fortunately, Davis survived though. He underwent surgery and remained hospitalized for 5 weeks. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department homicide detectives investigated the shooting, but the case remained unsolved for several months because of the inability to obtain much information from Davis due to his medical condition. So in the meantime, the detectives arranged to have the case profiled on a television show, LA's Most Wanted. In early October of 2009, Nolan's mother, sister, and uncle appeared on the show and appealed to the public for information while showing a photograph of Nolan during the broadcast. Not long thereafter, a detective contacted the investigating officers with information received from a paid confidential informant, Herbert Z. And based on that information, the detectives were able to put together a 6-pack photographic lineup from which Davis selected Hall's photograph. Confidential informant Herbert had been an 18th Street member since the age of 13 and was known as Midget. He later moved to the neighborhood that included the area claimed by the 11 Dudes subset of the Hoover gang. So he was able to obtain information about the Hoover members because he was associated with some of them, and his mother-in-law had once associated with the Hoover gang. With that being said, he knew Hall was a member of the 107 Hoovers and was known as the moniker Tiny Snaps. And mentioned that in October of 2009, Herbert was driving Hall, Bam Bam, Tiny Box, and 2 other members of the 107 Hoovers. And while driving past a house on 107th Street near Normandy Avenue, Hall mentioned that there had been a party there a while back and told Herbert that when he saw 2 ugly girls, which is a derogatory term for the Rolling Hundreds, walking out of the house. And once they were out, he yelled, "Fuck ugly girls, fuck uglies," and started shooting at the 2 men, while also saying he was with another homie who acted as a lookout at the time, but he didn't give a name. But he did say the homie waited in the corner watching for police while Hall shot the 2 men. Hall then ran through an alley, disposed of the gun, and walked back to the crime scene to watch the police taping up the area. After that, Herbert, he confirmed that it was a normal practice of gang members to go back to the scene of the shooting to determine whether the victim had died or not. And it was also normal for gang members to brag about committing such crimes such as shootings, drug sales, and walk-up murders because they served to enhance the reputation of the perpetrator within the gang and to intimidate neighborhood residents and rival gang members. Such crimes were known as putting in work, also mentioning that a gang member, he wouldn't brag falsely because other gang members would investigate and impose a strike on a member who claimed they committed someone else's crime. And Hall definitely had a close relationship with the informant because sometime later, He complained to Herbert that the victim's sister, her mother, had made a big deal out of the shooting and said she had to be stopped. The next day, Herbert contacted the detectives, and Hall was arrested in early October 2009 for a gang injunction violation. And later that month, while Hall was in custody, a detective arranged to have Hall placed near another confidential informant, Cleveland R., another Hoover member who was also in custody. And just prior to placing Hall in the informant's cell, the detectives interviewed him and informed him that he was suspected of the shooting of Davis and Nolan. And soon after that, he was placed in a cell with Cleveland. And during that nearly 5-hour conversation with the informant, Hall, he said a lot. For example, while speaking to Hall, he said, "They called me off to homicide. I don't know. Lil Kevin, he snitched on him for something." Twice more in the conversation, Hall guessed that Kevin or somebody else had snitched on him, while also mentioning, but detectives, they fucked up. They didn't fingerprint me. In addition to all that though, in April 2010, a police sergeant told the detectives about another incarcerated informant, a gang member known as Kill Kill, who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency in his case. The detectives, they briefed Kill Kill on some of the facts of the shooting. And once again, in order to stimulate a conversation with the informant, the detectives, they told Hall that he had been identified as a suspect in the shooting. The detectives, they then had Hall placed in the same cell as Kill Kill. And this conversation was also recorded. At the beginning of the conversation, Hall told Kill Kill he was Baby Snap from Hoover. Hall thought his homies might snitch on him, and also mentioned, "I know that nigga from UG that died. His mama knew my auntie." Later when Kill Kill asked, "You sure nobody seen you, right?" Hall said, "I don't know, man. I did my shit and dipped. I don't never check for shit like that, you feel me? I'm a on foot type of nigga, you know?" This prompted Kill Kill to suggest that he was a JLB, which also stands for Jump Out Boy, which was a term used by members involved in several shootings, whether by jumping out of a car or shooting on foot, to which Hall replied, "You feel me?" implying that he was indeed a JLB. Ultimately, due to several statements, witnesses, testimonies from informants and gang experts, and several recordings that referenced the shooting, Hall was found guilty of murder, plus the attempted murder, and was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Man, I got a couple lessons from this one. Nigga, don't gangbang. And for some reason you ever do, please keep some protection with you, especially if you know you're in the heart or the crossings of two rival gangs. And on the other end of things, if you ever get caught up, keep your fucking mouth closed. There's niggas locked up just like you, trying to get their freedom. Look, the fact that he already did something scandalous to end up in there with you should tell you everything you should know about him. And don't let niggas tell you it's a brotherhood. I'm sure it's like that in some cases, but for the most part, gang members are cutthroat against each other, especially if you're not from that gang. Anyways, that just gives another example of how deadly this war has been between the Hoovers and the Rolling Hundreds. These fools, they fucking hate each other. Honestly, that's just surface level shit. The brutality that these guys show against each other is a lot worse than that. But to continue to address this war and several others, we have to get into who the 107 Hoovers are. Who are the 107 Hoover gangster Crips?
When the smoke clear, when school get ready to start, all you hear is that you hear about what the Hoovers did. Mm-hmm. It's not about
not 92nd,
not 74th,
not 83rd, not yet. Hoover.
Yeah, you know, then that's why they were saying Hoover did.
Hoover did, yeah.
The 107 Hoover gangster Crips, also known as the 107 Group Gang or the CALI'S, and formerly known as the 107 Hoover Criminal Gangs, are a long-standing African-American street gang located on the west side of South Central Los Angeles, California. The 107 Hoover Criminals are an active subset of the larger Hoover Criminal Gang umbrella. So to fully understand this gang, we have to give a rundown of the overall Hoovers. As we already know, the Hoovers started off as gangster Crips in the 1970s. They're a collection of several different affiliated gangs along Hoover Avenue in South Central Los Angeles, and they run all the way into the unincorporated sections of Los Angeles County. And they're originally separated based off of the demographics of its members. For example, the now inactive Fortray Gangster Crips start off on 43rd Street and Hoover, and the 107 Hoover Gangster Crips start off 107th Street. And to be clear, all of the Hoovers start off as Crips once that identity was established. So from the Fortray Hoovers all the way up to the 11 Deuce, they operated under the Gangster Crips ideologies. But in the late 80s, early 1990s, culturally, there was a shift internally amongst Hoovers due to past issues some Hoovers had with other Crips, including East Coast Crips, the Main Street Crips, the Rolling 60s, and other neighborhood members. and some facts of Crips that also fell under the gangster Crip umbrella. So after a meeting, it was determined that with the exception of the 5 Deuce Hoovers, who still go by the 5 Deuce Hoover gangster Crips identity, the rest of the Hoovers would take the Crip out of their identity and officially go by criminals, relinquishing prior attachments that the gang had with the Crip umbrella, and also establishing their own separated unit of gangs. But to keep you guys updated, it's been rumors and confirmation that the 107 Hoover criminals went back to their roots of gangs and brought the Crip title back to their name.
He was a 107 Hoover Crip. 107 Hoover. And that nigga better not ever go against that. 107 is about. Say low. Say low. Say low. Low. Everybody out here that fell up under the guidance of 107, you've been warned. This is Crip or die.
Hoover, period. 107 ain't never stopped being Crip.
Come on, man.
We always, like I said, we always wanted to fight that. We the new, we one of the top-notch Crips. I think they betray it because of our younger generation.
I couldn't find an exact reason on why this section of the Hoovers are bringing back the Crip title. So if there's any OGs or anybody tapped into the streets, y'all let me know in the comments how the Hoovers came back to claiming this title. Let's have a conversation about it. But regardless of going by criminals or gangster Crips, from the 107 Hoovers Foundation, they've always been one of the most brutal gangs in the city. This particular section of the gang has become one of the most well-known and dangerous subsidiaries of all the Hoovers. This is once again based off of the area the gang resides in, but it's also based on the opposing gangs within that area.
They pride themselves on being everybody killers. EBK standing for that everybody killers. To symbolize their lethality in our community.
With the 107 Hoovers having a history of going out with pretty much all sections of the Rolling Hundreds, including the Undergrounds and the Block Crips. And with more than a few daily back and forths between these two gangs, it's safe to say that they're one of the Hoovers' mortal enemies. But that's just one gang in the area that the Hoovers are rivals with. They also go at it with different neighborhood Crips as well, and even a few gangster Crips in that area. But they also have a history of going at it with the gang that's even more hated than the Hoovers. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. The LAPD, while they have some good seeds that actually do good for the community, they also have some cops that terrorize the community they're supposed to police. And for those few that engage in these activities, they left a feeling of betrayal from its local, which manifested into a lot of animosity towards the police. To the point that there have been several shootouts, deadly situations, and murders between gangs and the police. For example, in Victorville, California, in 2009, Damian Tyshawn Kennedy and Anthony Pearson had an ongoing relationship and were the parents of a son. Pearson also had another older son, Darnell, who was 17. And on the evening of December 10th, 2009, Kennedy, who was a 107 Hoover member, borrowed Pearson's car, the Burgundy Mercury, to take Darnell to his friend Maurice's house to retrieve his video game. Maurice lived with his grandmother and his brother. And Maurice's uncle, Jeffrey Hughes, he lived in the garage. On that night, Kennedy was wearing Crips colors, blue pants, a blue sweatshirt, and a blue cap. And while they were driving to Maurice's house, Kennedy braked sharply for no apparent reason in front of a marked patrol car driven by Deputy Sheriff Maria Gascon. And right after that, the deputy activated her patrol unit's lights and signaled for him to stop. Kennedy, he pulled over, jumped out of the car, and told Darnell to drive away. But Darnell, he didn't do so. Kennedy and Gascon then began yelling at each other, followed by Gascon ordering Kennedy to get back into his car. Eventually, Kennedy complied, but once he got back into his car, he immediately drove off with a tire screeching. And after that, pulled out a gun and tossed it to Darnell, who used his shirt to grab the gun without touching it and tossed it back to Kennedy's lap. Gascon, she called for backup and pursued the car with her lights and sirens fully activated. Meanwhile in the car, while driving 55 to 60 miles an hour, Kennedy told Darnell, "I'm about to start barking at this bitch," which means to start shooting. But Darnell warned, "Don't shoot," because she's going to start shooting back. So instead, Kennedy continued to drive fast, braking hard numerous times and speeding through residential neighborhoods. And when they arrived at Maurice's house, Darnell jumped out of the moving car and ran inside the house. Kennedy, he continued to drive until he finally pulls over. And once at a complete stop, Kennedy jumps out of the car and starts to fire 3 shots at Gascon. Gascon, who saw the flash from Kennedy's gun, immediately ducked to her right. And right after that, Kennedy drives off and Gascon's followed. But during the pursuit, Kennedy Kennedy slammed on his brakes, made a U-turn, and drove directly at her. And as Gascon passed, he shot again, and she returned fire, ducking as 2 bullets hit the side of her patrol car. And this time when Gascon tried to follow Kennedy again, she lost him. A short while after that, Kennedy drove back to Maurice's residence, parked the car near the garage, and knocked on Hughes' door. When Hughes answers, Kennedy announced to him, "I popped that bitch. I hope I hit that bitch." During this conversation, Kennedy was rushed, angry, and wanted to find Darnell and Maurice. But before that, he asked Hughes if he could park his car in the garage to conceal it, which he agreed. Once inside the house, Kennedy told Darnell, "Tell mom I messed up. I shot at the police." And when Hughes tried to move the car into the garage, he was unable to unlock the steering wheel. Because Hughes heard police cars, he got Kennedy to drive the car into the garage. Kennedy then took out his gun, slipped the chamber back to eject the cartridge, and inserted the clip, followed by Kennedy asking Hughes where he could hide his gun. Before he uses the bathroom and finally leaves. Soon after, based off a tip from a local, deputies came up to their residence and found Pearson's car in the garage. In addition, the detectives searched their garage and found blue sweatpants, a beanie cap, CDs, and a do-rag. Inside the beanie cap were keys, including one for Pearson's car. Kennedy's identification card and a piece of mail addressed to him were also inside the sweatpants. In addition, one of the CDs had black, which is spelled BLCC, written on it, with the B crossed out and a CC instead of CK. A short time later, a CSP officer apprehended Kennedy near Hughes' residence and near where the shooting occurred. Kennedy was wearing blue basketball shirts, a mostly blue shirt with a Mickey Mouse image, and white sneakers with orange detailing. And soon after his arrest, Kennedy, he admitted he had been a member of the 107 Hoover gangster Crips, a subset of the Hoovers. Said he lived on 107th Street in the Hoover Crips territory in Los Angeles, while also mentioning that he had been jumped in at the age of 10 in 1986. Said his gang name was Demon. Said he moved to Rancho Cucamonga when he was a junior in high school. And in the end, due to statements from Darnell and Hughes, video evidence of the shooting, a thorough investigation, and several other factors, Kennedy was found guilty of the attempted murder of Sheriff Maria Gascon. And the court sentenced him to a determined term of 28 years to life and an indeterminate term of 110 years to life in state prison. Man, thankfully all parties involved came out of the situation alive. But it really just shows the nature of the 107 Hoovers. Literally, anybody can fall victim to these guys. Should sometimes a gang member, a civilian, or even a cop, you're at risk of losing your life if a running with a member of this gang goes south. All these activities led to a gang injunction being placed on the 107 Hoovers, which prohibited a lot of the members from coming in contact with each other, restricted members from hanging out in their respective areas, and resulted in a lot of the 107 Hoover members being locked up. But still, this gang didn't remain active and continued with pretty much the same activities as before their injunctions. You had drug sales, pimping and trafficking, assaults, assassinations, and especially still going to war with their enemies was still on the table. Rivals and allies are the 107 Hoover gangster Crips. Honestly, if we list the whole list of enemies when it comes to the Hoovers, we'd probably be here all day. These niggas, they're pretty much hated by most of the bigger gangs of Los Angeles. And to give it a little more perspective, on average, at least 30% of gangs list the Hoovers as their enemy, which initially doesn't seem like much, but you look at the size of Los Angeles in terms of gangs and how spread it out a lot of them are on the map, you can clearly see that most of the Hoovers are surrounded by enemy gangs. But for now, let's focus on the 107 Hoovers, who might actually have the longest list of rivals. First off, while most of the Hoovers are criminals now, they start off as gangster Crips and had a heavy attachment to the trade card when they were Crips. But like I already mentioned, they split from the Crip identity, and through that, formed a closer alliance amongst the Hoovers. But at the same time, the Hoovers, they gang a lot more enemies throughout Los Angeles. But first off, let's start with the longtime enemy and deadly rival of the Hoovers, the Rolling Hundreds, particularly the Underground and the Block Crips. This beef stems back to the 1970s around the infancy stages of both gangs. Initially, it's alleged that the two gangs were at least cordial or decent with each other in terms of rapport. But we all know at this point, that all changed on July 4th of 1979, when Andre Jones, who was known as Lil Annie, or Annie, was shot by an Underground Crip member. In addition to the Rolling Hundreds though, the 107 Hoover Crips have more than a few other enemy gangs on their list of rivals. For example, they have a long-standing war where pretty much all members of the neighborhood car, including the rolling 90s, the rolling 60s, the rolling 40s, and so forth. Matter of fact, the war with the neighborhood rolling 90 Crips is probably one of the most controversial because the neighborhood rolling 90 Crips used to actually be the 9-0 Hoover gangster Crips. Yet together, the 9-0s joined with the 9 Deuces and the 9-4s and the 107s to form one of the most feared juggernauts in the area. But internal issues caused a war between the 9-0s and the Hoovers.
Them dudes was Hoovers. You know? They was Hoovers. You know? Some of them was hard as rest of Hoovers.
Well, you got to remember, bro. 90 Seconds was a juggernaut.
Yes,
and
sir.
9 Deuce Hoover was like, you got to remember, they made 4 sets in
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It was 9 O's, 9 Deuce, 9 4, 107, probably more.
Yeah.
11 Deuce.
Yeah.
Like I said, 9 Deuce was all the way to Imperial.
Yes, sir. What happened with the relationship with 9-0 Hoover, 9 Deuce Hoover, and 107 Hoover? What happened?
Like I said, I don't know what went down, but all I know is I know in general that a lot of them, they didn't want it to happen. What happened?
What happened, right.
You know, because from my understanding, it was an off-brand motherfucker that didn't know nothing, that didn't grow up in the Hoover
About
area.
the function, how we get at.
Yeah, and he reacted, and that reaction, fucked everything up.
Yeah, created the situation.
And by then, it was too late.
Too late to pull back.
In addition, they have a history of going at it with the Bloodline Gangster Crips, as well as the 104 Hustler Crips. They also go at it with other Crips as well, like the 4 Trey Gangsters. The 107 Hoovers also have a history of going at it with all sections of the Main Street Crips. And while these two, they used to actually get along. They're deadly enemies these days. I couldn't find a reason for why though. So any OGs or somebody tapped in once again, let me know where this beef stems from, and more importantly, is there any end to it, or is it fuck each other for life? In addition, the 107 Hoovers, they also go at it with a few Mexican gangs as well, like South Los. And while they're actually cool with a couple Bloods and Paru members, the 107s have a long-standing rivalry with the Denver Lane Bloods. That's because pretty much from the jump. The 107s, they have more than a few prominent members who are more than with the business. These guys were a nightmare when they came to their opposition. Prominent figures. Originated in 1975, the 107 Hoovers are one of the oldest, not only Hoovers, but also Crips in Los Angeles. They have more than a few reputable members who have made the gang what it is today. But first off, I found a long list of members who are no longer with us, so definitely rest in peace to them. A few of them include Andre Ransom, also known as OG Devil, Pookie, Lil Psycho, Tiny Mo, Darius Mondale Hurth, also known as Big Pup, and Andre Jones, also known as Lil Annie, who we already mentioned was shot and killed by Underground Crip in the 1970s. Definitely rest in peace to them. And y'all let me know in the comments of any other members who are no longer with us, that their names live on. On top of that though, they also have a lot of OGs who have made the gang so prominent today due to their activities from back in the days. A few of them include Momo.
I say people don't believe that because how big 107 kind of got now. But at that time, before, if it wasn't for motherfuckers to pick that torch up, our set probably would have damn near went extinct because like I said, all our big hitters was gone. You know, but Moo stood there, you know what I mean? And Moo guided us and gave us the guidance that we needed,
Set the set on the right
He was
course.
our big brother.
So,
It's also Lil Red, DuBoy, Devil, Vulture, Casper, Big Jap. Matter of fact, all the Japs, from 1 to 5 and so forth if it's more, and Psycho. Y'all let me know in the comments if any of the OGs or prominent members I might have missed though too. Lastly, the 107s, they got a couple artists who've been putting in work for the Hoovers as well over the years. For example, Jap 5, who's also a reputable for the overall Hoover umbrella, has been showing out in the local rap scene for a couple years at this point, dropping numerous classics like Where I'm From, which is definitely a banger. It features Westside Paru member Hit J3, but it's also activated in Gang Slide. Look, trust, it's plenty more other tracks that bang too. So y'all let me know in the comments your favorite Jap 5 song. Or if you haven't heard of them, go tap in ASAP. Get from under that rock. Anyways, bruh's known for knocking niggas out and putting in a lot of work for his game. But he's also a really talented rapper. And in my opinion, in terms of rappers who are up and coming, this nigga definitely has the best punchlines and flows out of most other Hoover rappers coming out of LA. And as we already know, he's been in prison for a few years at this point. But his stepdad, Cartoon, said he's actually due to be set free this year. So that's definitely something to look forward to. Yeah, Jap 5 was pretty much the only artist I could find from this particular section of the Hoovers. But y'all let me know in the comments of any other artists who I might have missed, man. Let's get their music heard. Current state of the 107 Hoover criminal gangster Crips. The Hoovers are one of, if not the most hated gang in Los Angeles County. They have a history of having some of the most shystest, grimiest, brutal, and dangerous members when it comes to gangbanging. Because of these factors, they've accumulated more than a few enemy gangs that are frankly hell-bent on either making an example out of a Hoover or taking one out. This case is emphasized damn near double when it comes to the 107 Hoover. They've always had a long list of gangs, including cops, who are determined to take them out. But regardless of that, the 107 Hoovers continue to grow and thrive to this day. All the way to the point to where they have a presence that can be felt beyond Los Angeles. For example, the 107 Hoovers also have a strong presence in Fresno, with more than a few gang stories coming out of that area. For example, in the early morning hours of June 29th of 2014, sometime between 2:30 a.m., Cecilia Hernandez and Jose Mendoza, her boyfriend, were sitting in Mendoza's car. They were parked on the street in a residential neighborhood on the west side of Fresno. Hernandez was sitting on Mendoza's lap on the driver's seat, with the driver's door wide open. And while they spoke, a vehicle drove past them and then returned, stopping parallel to their vehicle, with the other vehicle's passenger side facing them. And there were 3 men in the vehicle. The front passenger immediately pulls out a gun. Also in the rear passenger seat was 107 Hoover member Tabari Maurice Townsend, who had a pistol equipped with the laser beam attachment, and they both aimed the guns at Mendoza's face, followed by them asking Mendoza several times where he was from, particularly asking Mendoza if he was from Strother or Eden, which is a collection of alliances that reside in Fresno. But Mendoza did not have an affiliation with any. And while that was going on, Hernandez began crying and begging for her life. But the suspects told her, shut up. And after a few more seconds of Hernandez pleading for her life, the men opened fire on her car before speeding away from the scene. Bullets struck Hernandez in her abdomen, leg, and arm. Mendoza was shot in his arm and on his left side. Thankfully, the two survived and was able to call 911, with law enforcement responding at approximately 2:50, transporting Hernandez and Mendoza to a local hospital. Mendoza's injuries, they weren't life-threatening. He was treated at the emergency room and released without surgery. But Hernandez, however, underwent surgery and she was unconscious on life support for about 1 week. And she remained hospitalized for almost 2 months. She was unable to walk for 6 months. And at trial, she was still going through physical therapy, taking medications for anxiety and depression, walked with a noticeable limp. And during the trial, both Hernandez and Mendoza identified Townsend as one of the shooters. And due to their statements at trial, statements from a gang expert, surveillance evidence, and several other factors, Townsend was eventually found guilty of the 2 attempted murders, and the trial court sentenced him to a prison term of 80 years to life. And that's just one of many cases I found on the Fresno 107s. This gang is one of the most ruthless in Central California. I personally remember how brutal this gang was. I went to Fresno State and it was down there a new story popping out with these guys like every week, like no cap. The crazy part is that the 107 Hoover Crips has spread beyond California. They've also been found in other states like Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon.
The Hoover gang has been in Portland for decades, but we wanted to know, who are these people, how they've been affecting our community throughout the years.
Our Valina Jones is digging deeper now into that, and she joins us live. What are you learning tonight, Valina?
Jennifer and Jeff, this gang has a long and dangerous history throughout the state, dating back to attempted murder back in the 80s. Now, while there is still a long way to go, both federal and state officials say they're working to get all gangs off of our streets.
Today, we're making the community safer.
The state's mission, taking down the Hoover gang one member at a time.
This indictment lays out 3 identified murders, 7 attempted murders, multiple gun seizures, and the trafficking of methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine.
The Hoovers, born in Los Angeles, have ties throughout the West Coast, some members calling Portland home since the 80s. The U.S. State Attorney announcing 3 of those gang members are now facing federal racketeering and murder charges.
They pride themselves on being everybody killers. EBK standing for that everybody killers, to symbolize their lethality in our community.
The gang has a long history in Portland.
From the onset of their violent initiations to always use force in the form of retaliation and have that cycle unfold in our community.
That retaliation seen in the 2014 murder of Urvea Herring, where 6 Hoover gang members were charged in her death. Court records show the shooting was in retaliation after a fight between the Hoover and Woodland Park Bloods gang. Herring's mom spoke during the sentencing of one of the men.
Every time he had been in the courtroom, he smirked and smiled. It's like when he was walking in, smiling. He has no remorse for what he had done to me and my family.
As more of their members rack up charges, the state is putting the gang on high alert.
So a simple message to gang members in Oregon is wake up, stop the violence. You will be held accountable.
Prosecutors say the Hoovers are a large gang and one of the most violent in the city of Portland. Reporting live in downtown Portland, Valina Jones, Point 6 News.
Valina, thank you. This is a case we're following very closely. Look for updates here and always online, coin.com.
Texas, Tennessee, Wichita, Kansas, North Carolina, Alabama, New Jersey, Georgia, Arkansas, and Florida. Yeah, these niggas is everywhere. I'm sure I missed some states, so y'all let me know in the comments of other states they have a presence in. Anyways, that's it for the 107 Hoover Gangster Crip. Y'all got any crazy stories about these guys? Any close calls? Also, did I miss anything? Did I get something wrong? Y'all let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video or if you're part of the Danger Gang. Y'all stay safe and dangerous out there.